a rival there since Newt Gingrich as Speaker, Republican Speaker, back in 1997, and against all the warnings and threats, indeed, from China. What do we understand, Celia, is her agenda there now over, what, the next 24 hours?
It's interesting. To be honest, she hasn't said much about what she intends to do, and it'll be very interesting to see the tone of her language when she is in Taiwan, what she promises. I understand there's a bill, possibly $4.5 billion worth of military support up for grabs for Taiwan if the United States decides to designate Taiwan a key non-NATO U.S. ally. The U.S. has already given $108 million in arms sale to Taiwan already this year. That angered Beijing. And so certainly a lot of military support could be on offer. I think also we'll be interested to see what other kinds of support, whether she extends further diplomatic support, whether she speaks about support for possible Taiwanese independence. That would infuriate Beijing. And so it'll be interesting to hear the language that she uses when she's on the ground.
Just to be clear for perhaps some of our viewers who don't know the history of Taiwan, split away 1949 from the Chinese mainland. Everyone there speaks Mandarin, or mostly do, and will be very conscious, will they, of what is being said on the mainland, because of course they are having daily exercise, or not daily, but frequent military drills, aren't they, in the expectation or in preparation for an attack at some stage.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, things really have been in flux in Taiwan in recent years. You know, as I was saying before, for a long time it was accepted that the status quo, really on all sides, was really the way to go. That's sort of what China wanted. Wasn't really going to push the Taiwan issue too much. The United States wanted to maintain the status quo, and of course Taiwan. That has really changed on all sides for a variety of reasons. But the Taiwanese people themselves have been adapting to that as well. You know, preparing. You know, bomb shelters have been in place in parts of Taiwan for quite some time. But now we're hearing much more urgent preparations, stories of, for example, hospitals preparing trauma wards and the like. Just
stay here, Celia, because we've just heard had a tweet from the Global Times saying that this aircraft is the USC 40C aircraft, said to be Pelosi's flight to Taiwan. No official confirmation, but it didn't head straight to Taiwan from the South China Sea, but circled around and is approaching Taiwan. It's now landed from the Philippine Sea. Observers said it likely attempts to avoid any possible PLA interception. Barbara, well, we sort of knew she was going to land, didn't we? Barbara Plett-Usher joins us now from Washington. Do we know what the itinerary is now that she's on the ground?
Nothing has been officially mentioned since her flight itself and her visit itself wasn't confirmed. We expect that she'll probably retire for the night quite soon after arriving, and that most of her engagements will take place on Wednesday morning. It is expected that she will meet with the president as well as some legislators. We have reports, unconfirmed, that she is also going to be meeting with activists who are critical of Chinese human rights. So these are some of the details that have been coming through, but none of her itinerary has been confirmed, as I said, because, of course, the trip itself wasn't confirmed.
I mean, it's very early. I mean, she's only just landed, but presumably no reaction yet from the White House.
No, there hasn't been a reaction yet, but the White House came as close to having a reaction as it could without stating that she was actually taking the trip. So the spokesman for the National Security Council yesterday had quite a lengthy press conference in which he stressed again and again that any possible trip by Ms. Pelosi would not be a change in policy, that China would be overreacting if it followed on with its threats, that a Speaker of the House had visited Taiwan before, so this was not unprecedented, and so on. Basically saying there's no reason to think that U.S. policy has changed, even if the most powerful Democrat in Congress visits. It's a fear here that in the administration that the Chinese are not quite getting that, because Nancy Pelosi is a Democrat, the president is a Democrat, the separation of powers whereby Congress is independent to do what it wants separate from the presidency, and Mr. Biden doesn't have the authority to tell her not to go. All of these things which we've been hearing endlessly for the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I suppose
the concern is that the Chinese don't actually pick that up.
And it raises the question, doesn't it, for a lot of people, just wondering about the timing of this, Barbara, because there have been so many warnings about how provocative this would be.
Yes, well, Nancy Pelosi was planning to visit Taiwan in April, and then she had to postpone because she got COVID. So it's been on the books for a while, or at least for part of this year. And now the trip has gone ahead. In that period, tensions have been high between China and the United States anyway. Relations are low, but during the period of months that have followed since April, I think the administration has assessed that the risk of tensions will increase even more, because they're thinking about the party congress that Xi Jinping is holding in November, where he wants to get to cement his third term in office, and in the run-up to that period would need to show that he was, might have to feel that he would have a demonstration of strength rather than a weakness, which a high-level visit of a U.S. politician to Taiwan might suggest. That's been the kind of calculation here, and she will have heard that. But she's a long-time critic of Beijing. There's a lot of support for this in Congress, this idea of showing solidarity with Taiwan as a democracy. And she hasn't said anything herself about the timeline, but there are midterm elections coming up in November, in which the Democrats might lose the House, and then she would no longer be Speaker. So it's possible that factors into the timeline. But she has been duly warned about the risks, if not a sort of military response to her actual visit, although we are seeing demonstrations of Chinese military power, then along the road that the escalation might continue to percolate and cause China to become even more assertive than it has been, and make relations with China more difficult than they have been.
Yeah, Barbara, stay with us if you would, please. We're just seeing some pictures now of people coming off this plane. It's so dark that we can't actually make anyone out. But as I said, Nancy Pelosi is there with a delegation. And Celia Hatton, our Asia-Pacific editor, still in the studio alongside me. We talk about the spirit of Taiwan. We talk about it's a democracy and everything else. What sort of presence is there of mainland China, reflecting mainland China's position in Taiwan, if any at all?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think there are lots of people in the Taiwanese opposition who really espouse to have closer ties with Beijing. They say, look, we should really pay attention to geography and to history on this. And really, China is such an easy trading ally for us. Why don't we forge closer ties with China economically, get some political assurances? And they don't really see closer ties with Beijing as being a terrible thing. Now, I think the majority of people in Taiwan, especially younger people, are opposed to that idea. They are much more in favour
Celia, here is, sorry to interrupt, here she is coming down the steps, 82-year-old Nancy Pelosi walking down the steps, first Speaker of the House of Representatives to land in Taipei since 1997. A few flash bulbs going there as the press have gathered on the tarmac. And Celia Hatton, our Asia-Pacific editor, alongside me now. Interesting that I'm not quite sure whether this is being watched live in Taiwan, but certainly this trip was being followed on Weibo, which caused the site to crash, the flight tracking app to crash. And presumably, though, the people watching in China will be furious about this because of the response from Chinese state media.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been interesting to watch Chinese state media cover this. At first, they were relatively quiet, and I wondered whether they were trying to kind of, keep the pressure off a little bit, hoping in a sense that maybe Nancy Pelosi wouldn't make the trip, and therefore they didn't have to kick up a fuss too much, but that certainly has changed in recent times. We've been seeing opinion editorials in Chinese newspapers threatening that the United States will pay a price and so on, sort of echoing the line of the government. This has also been very carefully followed in Taiwan itself, although some people have said, oh, if it hadn't been leaked in advance that she was coming, maybe we wouldn't have been so interested. It's been fascinating to see how this has been covered, but I think at this point, if it's a very short visit, it'll be interesting to see how long it drags on in the media on both sides of the Taiwan Strait.
But Taiwan's sense of vulnerability and precariousness, being so close to the mainland, obviously shared by regional neighbours as well.
Interesting. I mean, one thing I've heard increasingly is this idea that Taiwan is edging towards the so-called porcupine defence, that it's going to arm itself so heavily that it will become untouchable by China. And it's thought by some that this is just a matter of time between when Taiwan is able to acquire enough arms that it's really an unpalatable option for Beijing to invade. And so the question is really, does Xi Jinping try to invade now if he wants to, because it's possible, still possible in theory, or does he put it off because he's got other concerns on his plate? And so that porcupine defence is really on the lips of many people.
Celia, stay with us. I'm going to just ask another question with Barbara Klesch-Usher whilst Matthew Amroliwala takes over for Global and just replaces me, so you'll hear his voice in a moment. But Barbara, just explaining the one China policy and strategic ambiguity, is that shifting subtly, if not officially, do you think, within the White House?
Well, the White House certainly officially has stressed again and again in recent days that the one China policy is not shifting. Now, this, of course, is the policy that both China and the United States say they follow, although they have different versions of what it means. For China, it means that China and Taiwan are the same country and Beijing is the only government. For the United States, it means it recognizes that there's only one government, Beijing, but it does not take a position on the status of the two sides. It says that that should be settled peacefully. It has informal relations with Taiwan, but it also is required by U.S. law to make sure that Taiwan is able to defend itself, so it sells defensive weapons to Taiwan. Whether the needle is shifting on that is something that the Americans have said is not the case, but there is reason to question that because the president, Joe Biden, in the past year has 3 times pushed the envelope on a doctrine called strategic ambiguity, which is that the Americans never quite say exactly how they would respond if the Chinese were to invade or use force against Taiwan. And he has now 3 times said that the U.S. is obligated to defend Taiwan. That's not exactly what the agreement says. The agreement says that the U.S. is obligated to help to make sure that Taiwan has weapons to defend itself. So the question is whether he's making that statement by accident, whether he's signaling a change in position. I don't think that this administration would be rolling out a new policy in that way, in that sort of ad hoc way. And every time Mr. Biden has said that, the White House has walked it back.
Barbara, thanks very much. More from you in a moment or two as we continue to watch these pictures live being played out from Taiwan. The first moments of Nancy Pelosi's visit. Celia, as you watch these pictures, what do you make of what we've just witnessed?
It's just a historic moment, isn't it? This was something that was played out 25 years ago when Newt Gingrich, the then House Speaker, visited Taiwan. But that was a different era. China was much poorer, much weaker in relation to the United States. Things have changed immeasurably since then. Also, Newt Gingrich was a member of the Republican Party. In the White House at the time was Bill Clinton, a Democrat. And so the Clinton administration at the time could conceivably argue that they hadn't put Newt Gingrich up to this visit. And so really things have changed. Nancy Pelosi is a very different character from Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich spent 3 days in Beijing meeting with officials before traveling on to Taipei. Not a friend, I think, safe to say, of the Chinese leadership. She's been a consistent critic for decades now. So really, that's the concern, that it's not just that it's a visit by the House Speaker. It is a visit by a top-ranking Democrat. She is a visit by Nancy Pelosi herself, who in Chinese slang is referred to as the old witch, or the American old lady. They like to refer to her as in derogatory sense. So this is just a different era, a different person from a different political party.
Celia Hatton, thanks for taking us through that analysis as we watched those pictures of Nancy Pelosi arriving there in Taiwan at the start of that visit, that breaking news that the US House Speaker arriving there very late at night, and you can see just the dark pictures, but there she comes down the steps, Nancy Pelosi starting that visit, as Celia was saying, the first US House Speaker since Newt Gingrich to arrive there in Taiwan, despite all of those warnings that we have had from China in recent days. Let us continue with coverage with Barbara Usher, our correspondent in Washington, and Steve McDonald waiting to talk to us from Beijing. But first, let us start in Washington. So despite everything we've heard in recent days, the trip is happening and it's started.
Yes, that's right. Nancy Pelosi has just touched down after days, if not weeks, of speculation and rumor about will she, won't she, is she planning to do it, will she go ahead with it. The administration advising her quietly that the risks were high, that this would greatly increase tensions with China, but publicly trying very hard not to state its own preference. Joe Biden coming close by saying the military thought it wasn't a good idea, but then he himself feeling that he couldn't go so far as to tell the Speaker of the House, an independent branch and a co-equal branch of the government, what to do. And in the end, Ms. Pelosi, for her own calculations, decided that she would go ahead with the trip. She has been flying on a military plane, which is standard for these congressional trips, for the security of them and the transport. And so she has now just landed in Taiwan, despite threats from the Chinese, concerns and anger from the Chinese, and rhetoric that has been accompanied by warships scrambling to the median line between Taiwan and China, live fire exercises in recent days. So in other words, shows of military strength. And now we wait to see what she will do while she's there, what she will say, and how the Chinese will respond.
Exactly on that point, let's head to Beijing and Steve McDonald. Steve, I mentioned there the multiple warnings from the Chinese over recent days. We had that phone call between President Xi and President Biden last week, but the trip is happening, the dynamic has been changed, and I suppose we're now into an unknown dynamic.
根本原因是台湾当局和美方不断改变现状。台湾当局一再以美谋独，拒不承认9·2共识，大搞去中国化，推行渐进式台独。而美方企图搞以台制华，不断歪曲、虚化、掏空一个中国原则，加强美台官方往来，为台独分裂活动撑腰打气，这是十分危险的玩火行动。玩火者必。
Well, around about at the same time that she landed, local media here, China Central Television, the People's Daily, flashed this news that Chinese fighter jets were flying across the Taiwan Strait. Now, maybe they'll fly across the median line, maybe they'll get closer than they otherwise would have. I mean, it could be that over the next 24 hours we're going to see more and more actions like this. I mean, it's interesting, from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, a whole bunch of tweets appeared just as Nancy Pelosi arrived. And I'll give you a small flavour of one of them. So this is from Hua Chunying. The US and Taiwan have made provocations together first, whereas China has been compelled to act in self-defense. Any countermeasures to be taken by China would be justified and necessary response to the US oblivion to China's repeated démarches and the US's unscrupulous behaviour. So yet more warnings that there'll be some sort of military response from China. We'll just have to see, well, as I say, what happens over the next 24 hours.
You talk about the tweets. Let me tell you, just in the last few seconds, news from Nancy Pelosi, quotes from her saying our discussions with Taiwan's leadership will focus on reaffirming our support for our partner and on promoting our shared interests, including advancing a free and open Indo-Pacific region. She goes on to say the visit is in no way contradicting long-standing United States policy. But Steve, Beijing sees it exactly the opposite.
No, they see this as something of a red line. Now, I know there have been visits in the past from speakers, but it's a long time ago. Xi Jinping is now in power here, and the administration here has really been talking up its intention to one day grab Taiwan back, even using military force if it's necessary. And to have such a senior figure from the US arrive in Taiwan, well, they see it as a bit of a slap in the face. However, I mean, what was Nancy Pelosi going to do? Once China starts making threats, it's going to be hard for her to back down as well. I mean, the danger with all of this posturing from Beijing and Washington and threats going back and forth and all this military hardware in the region being assembled is that somehow or other there'll be an accidental flash, an accidental mishap, miscommunication, and it could lead to, well, actual fighting between the world's two superpowers.
Steve, thanks very much. Let's go back to Barbara in Washington. Barbara, your assessment of why this has flared up now and over the last few weeks?
Well, Nancy Pelosi had been planning to visit Taiwan already in spring and wasn't able to because of COVID. And then when the rumors started that she was planning to go again and that the administration felt that this wasn't a good timing, because of Chinese domestic politics, they're very aware that there's going to be a party congress, an important party congress in November, that Xi Jinping is gearing towards it. He wants to use it to confirm an unprecedented third term. They were concerned that a senior, the most senior Democrat in Congress landing in Taiwan at this time would provoke him and cause him to respond in a way that he might not have otherwise. Although, as he was explaining, it's always a controversial issue. And then I think he was right. When the Chinese started to react as they did, even if Ms. Pelosi had wanted to back out, which is not at all necessarily the case. She has a strong history of standing up to China on human rights issues, but even if she had wanted to, it would have begun to look like appeasement here, and she was starting to get quite vocal support from others in Congress, including Republicans who feel the same way about Taiwan as she does.
Barbara Plett-Usher there in Washington, Steve McDonnell in Beijing. Thanks for taking us through the immediate snapshot reaction as the visit there from Nancy Pelosi starts in Taiwan. Let's continue the conversation. Let's talk to Daniel Russell, who served as the top US diplomat for Asia under former President Barack Obama. Thanks for joining us here on BBC News. Is this visit right or reckless, do you think?
Well, look, national security is all about risk management, and I would say that Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan right now is an unnecessary risk. It's a lot like a feel-good gesture for the speaker, for many in Taiwan, but it's kind of a sugar high that is likely to be followed by a crash. It doesn't really serve a strategic purpose, because what Taiwan needs from the United States isn't sympathy and symbolism. It needs real defense capabilities. It needs economic support. And it also needs the U.S. to handle its relationship with China prudently, because tensions between Washington and Beijing translate to greater risk to Taiwan.
You talk of a crash. What sort of things potentially do you envisage?
Well, look, you heard from your correspondent, Barbara, that this is a tremendously fraught political moment in China and a low point in the bilateral relationship. Remember, dictators have politics too, and Xi Jinping is in the middle of a political struggle that's tremendously sensitive. So the timing is very awkward, and I think that it's virtually guaranteed that the Chinese are going to feel impelled to respond in what the world will see as a vigorous way. Now, we're in a security dilemma in the sense that the Chinese think that they're the aggrieved party, the Americans think that we in Taiwan are the aggrieved party, and each side is taking a step that it believes is justified, but that feels to the other to be escalatory and provocative. So the Chinese have signaled that there will unquestionably be some retaliation, some response through military means, the People's Liberation Army and the PLA. And the PLA is already conducting large-scale exercises, previously scheduled exercises, in the vicinity. We should expect them to ramp that up. I think there will be short-term military and non-military actions. They could recall their ambassador. They could perform economic acts of retaliation against Taiwan, not likely against the United States. They could impose some sanctions on the Speaker of the House, not very meaningful. But in the longer term, I think we could expect to see an even more vigorous strategy of pressure and punishment against Taiwan. I also think that there's a real risk because we were on the cusp of engineering a summit meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping this fall, probably on the margins of the G20 leaders meeting, that could be a casualty of the speaker's visit. And if so, that's a big loss to the relationship, because that personal relationship is one of the few strands really holding things together between Beijing and Washington.
I mentioned that you closely advised Barack Obama. Joe Biden, of course, did not want this visit to go ahead. He said it wasn't the right time, was unable to stop it. But how would you advise Joe Biden? How does he handle this, given that it has gone ahead?
Well, now that it has happened, I think the critical thing is to avoid an unintended incident that could quickly spiral to a crisis and even to conflict, because the crisis suppression mechanisms, the escalation prevention mechanisms that formerly existed between the U.S. and China, that included military-to-military channels and hotlines, those things are moribund. Those things are largely inactive now. So the risk of an incident or an accident triggering a confrontation that neither Joe Biden nor Xi Jinping wanted is very high right now. So I would expect that the White House is signaling to the Department of Defense that they need to exercise a high degree of caution just to reduce the proximity, reduce the surface area. And I think we've already heard the NSC, the National Security Council spokesperson, begin trying to de-escalate rhetoric as well, so that tempers don't flare to the boiling point.
Yes, you talk about the rhetoric. Worth just repeating what Steve McDonald told us, with China already slamming as extremely dangerous US actions. I just want to put onto our screens a map of the area, because as suddenly we see this new flashpoint in the world. Just explain to our viewers why Taiwan is caught between two superpowers.
Well, look, even the basic diplomatic relationship between the United States and the People's Republic of China was founded on a compromise, on ambiguity about the status and the future of Taiwan. The simple fact is the U.S. does not recognize Taiwan as a nation, and in fact is opposed to Taiwan independence. At the same time, it's a flourishing, vigorous, admirable democratic society that the United States wants to support and preserve. Geographically, it's barely 100 miles off the coast of the People's Republic of China. Mainland China itself has grown tremendously powerful over the recent decades and has a national mission to what they call reunify the country, to absorb Taiwan and make it part of the PRC, just the way they have absorbed Hong Kong. The United States, Japan, most countries in Asia, and I think democracies around the world, understand that not only would this be a huge setback for the cause of democracy and universal law and rights, it would also have huge defense and security implications for the United States and many friends around the world. So maintaining the status quo, as unsatisfactory and awkward as the status quo might be, is the least worst option available.
Just a final thought, because you touched on it already. I suppose one of the consequences of this trip is it makes all of those areas that those two capitals, Washington and Beijing, have been grappling with so much more difficult. One thinks of trade, one thinks of the war in Ukraine, one thinks of climate change. All of it presumably becomes tougher given this.
It's already tough. It's certainly going to get scratchier for the foreseeable future. A lot will hinge, I think, on whether the Chinese side overplays their hand, makes mistakes, let alone triggers some sort of incident. As I said, the US and China just don't have.
President Biden was present in the command center when he was killed more than a decade ago. But he's also been heavily criticized for overseeing last year's chaotic troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. This is now a major victory.
The United States continues to demonstrate our resolve and our capacity to defend the American people against those who seek to do us harm. You know, we make it clear again tonight that no matter how long it takes, no matter where you hide, if you are a threat to our people, the United States will find you and take you out.
Unlike Al-Qaeda, the Taliban have a national, not global agenda. But they've been close allies of Al-Qaeda for years. Recently, though, they played down their links after promising not to allow foreign attacks to be planned on Afghan soil.
The Taliban, by hosting Ayman al-Zawahiri in downtown Kabul, have proven a lot of such assumptions wrong. And made any kind of
fragile at this point, extremely, and having gone so much, and opposing any external interference on Taiwan. So, what are the three Sino-U.S. joint communiques, and why do they matter? Take a look at this one.
The three communiques are a collection of three joint statements made by the governments of the United States and China. The story goes back to 1971, when former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger made his first visit to China, opening a new chapter in China-U.S. relations. Kissinger met with Zhou Enlai, where the then Chinese premier expressed his hopes for improved bilateral ties. This trip paved the way for the groundbreaking of the 1972 meeting between then Chinese Chairman Mao Zedong and U.S. President Richard Nixon, ending 23 years of diplomatic isolation and mutual hostility. At the conclusion of this trip, China and the U.S. signed the Shanghai Communique, the first communique between the two sides. In the document, both nations pledged to work toward the full normalization of diplomatic relations. The U.S. stated they acknowledged that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there is but one China and that Taiwan is a part of China. Both sides agreed to respect each other's national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the two nations agreed to take action against any country establishing hegemony in the Asia-Pacific. The second communique was an achievement of then U.S. President Gerald Ford's visit to China in December 1975. Known as a joint communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations, this document formally announces the commencement of normal relations between the two nations. In doing so, the U.S. again acknowledged China's position that there is but one China and Taiwan is part of China. In addition, Washington also declared it would end formal political relations with Taiwan, and both sides reaffirmed their wish to reduce the risk of international conflict. On January 1st, 1979, China and the U.S. officially opened their diplomatic relations at the ambassadorial level. In the same year, at the invitation of then U.S. President Jimmy Carter, then Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping's first visit to Washington raised bilateral ties to a new level. The two governments issued the third communique on August 17, 1982. This document reaffirmed the desire of both sides to further strengthen economic, cultural, educational, scientific, and technological ties. Both sides also reaffirmed the statements made about the Taiwan issue in the previous communique. Washington declared its intent to gradually decrease its sale of arms to Taiwan. The three joint communiques built the bilateral foundations between the two sides. Gao Yiming, CGTN.
The Foreign Affairs Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference says Pelosi's visit has violated the One China principle in the three China-U.S. joint communiques. It says the action has infringed the basic principles of international relations and caused great harm to China-U.S. relations. The committee says China opposes any acts by any foreign forces that intervene in China's process of peaceful reunification, and China does not allow any country to interfere with Taiwan affairs. The committee says the U.S. administration promised many times that it would stick to the One China principle and would not support those seeking Taiwan independence, but its remarks and acts have been the opposite to these promises. Let's continue our discussion with my guests here, Einar Tangen and Victor Gao. Gentlemen, one issue that's been repeatedly raised is that this trip by Nancy Pelosi does not bear benefits to anybody, not to the American people, not to the people in Taiwan. Einar, as you mentioned, if China decided to levy tariffs as a result, as a countermeasure to all of this, it would actually harm the American people. So what will this visit do eventually?
Well, as I've said before, she wants something to kind of cap her legacy. And I would see this as just personal ego. She got boxed into a corner earlier when she said she would go. Once again, she's afraid of giving the Republicans a card to say that she's soft on China. And well, no, everyone knows that she's not. She's been against China for many years, has said so and acted upon that. So at this juncture, you can only see it as some gesture towards her own legacy, and also some hope that she could prevent her party from losing as badly as it looks like they will be losing in these upcoming elections.
Victor, I remember you saying that this will be detrimental to many parties here. Explain to us the detriment here and who will suffer as a result of this.
Well, first of all, it detriments the China-U.S. relations because I think from the Chinese perspective, this bilateral relations is very, very important for the Chinese people as well as for the American people. And we want to build this bilateral relations on a high level of trust. Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan damages the trust between the two governments and between the two people. Now, secondly, I think American businesses may suffer the consequences. Why? Because China now is really figuring out what exactly is happening in the United States, that more and more politicians want to go to Taiwan to support those who seek Taiwanese independence away from China, for example, and whether there is a reason, whether there is a pattern, whether someone is poisoning China-U.S. relations. And for tonight, it's very clear. It's Nancy Pelosi. She is poisoning China-U.S. relations. And this is not good for businesses from the United States operating huge businesses in China. They not only support their products and services to the Chinese consumers here, but they also export their products and services back to the United States. And then I would say it will be very, very difficult to reverse the bad consequences that come out from this very ill-advised visit by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. And I would say that the two governments in China and the United States, the two militaries, for example, as well as the business communities, may also bear the overhand of this bad, ill-advised visit. So I hope eventually Nancy Pelosi will realize she is doing no one a favor. She is doing huge damage to bilateral China-American relations.
Hold that thought, gentlemen. I'll be right back with you. Now, the Taiwan Work Office of the CPC Central Committee says Pelosi's visit to Taiwan has broken solemn political commitments made by the U.S. and sent a gravely wrong signal to separatist forces. It says the Biden administration has not corrected the mistakes of the former government and sought to persuade its allies to play the Taiwan card. The Taiwan Work Office says the U.S. government has blatantly violated UN Resolution 2758, spread wrong messages with the ambiguous position of Taiwan, and attempted to make the Taiwan question an international issue. It says the U.S.'s anti-China forces and the DPP authorities cannot change the fact that Taiwan is a part of China. I mean, we heard this lengthy response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, long but restrained, without specific countermeasures mentioned. We talked about possible countermeasures on the diplomatic level here that will further sink relations. This bilateral relationship has witnessed many ups and downs in the decades in the past, but it's going to be difficult to imagine how the two sides will recover in the aftermath of this visit. Honor, can I get your thoughts on the picture of the relationship after this episode?
Well, the difficulty is the United States is a democracy, so whoever's in office now and probably 2.5 years from now, they will not be in office. There'll be a new elected president, and you don't know what their position is going to be. So this is the difficulty for China. China plans long term. They hold, everything.
我们敦促美方恪守承诺，停止与中国台湾地区进行任何形式的官方往来，停止干涉中国内政，不向台独分裂势力发出任何错误信号，不要在危险的道路上越走越远。任何逆历史潮流而动，企图拿台湾问题做文章，危害中国主权和领土完整的错误行径，注定不会得逞，必将自食其果。
8月2号，美众议院议长佩洛西窜访中国台湾地区，中方对此强烈谴责，坚决反对。中方曾多次阐明窜访台湾的严重后果，但佩明知故犯，恶意挑衅，制造危机，严重违反一个中国原则和中美3个联合公报规定，严重冲击中美关系政治基础，严重破坏中美两国两军关系。
没事，刚刚想要请乔东。
美方此举向台独分裂势力释放严重错误信号，进一步加剧了台海紧张局势升级。民进党当局挟洋自重，勾连外部势力作乱，执意邀佩访台，其行径是非常危险的，势必引发严重后果。中国人民解放军高度戒备，将展开一系列针对性军事行动予以反制，坚决捍卫国家主权和领土完整，坚决挫败外部势力干涉和台独分裂图谋。
本台消息，2022年8月2号，新华社授权公告，中国人民解放军将于北京时间2022年8月4号12时到7号12时，在以下海域和空域进行重要军事演训行动，并组织实弹射击，具体为：
北纬25度15分26秒。东经120度29分20秒，北纬24度50分30秒，东经120度05分45秒，北纬25度04分32秒，东经119度51分22秒，北纬25度28分12秒，东经120度14分30秒，4点连线。北纬26度07分00秒，东经121度57分00秒，北纬25度30分00秒，东经121度57分00秒，北纬25度30分00秒，东经121度28分00秒，北纬26度07分00秒。东经121度28分00秒 4点连线。北纬25度34分00秒，东经122度50分00秒，北纬25度03分00秒，东经122度50分00秒，北纬25度03分00秒，东经122度11分00秒，北纬25度34分00秒，东经122度11分00秒，4点连线。北纬22度56分00秒，东经122度40分00秒，北纬23度38分00秒，东经122度51分00秒，北纬23度38分00秒，东经123度23分00秒，北纬22度56分00秒，东经123度09分00秒，4点连线。北纬21度14分00秒，东经121度33分00秒，北纬21度33分00秒，东经121度18分00秒，北纬21度07分00秒，东经120度43分00秒，北纬20度48分00秒，东经120度59分00秒，4点连线。北纬22度43分00秒，东经119度14分00秒，北纬22度10分00秒，东经119度06分00秒，北纬21度33分00秒，东经120度29分00秒，北纬22度09分00秒，东经120度32分00秒，4点连线。为了安全，在此期间，有关船只和飞行器不要进入上述海域和空域。
东部战区新闻发言人施以陆军大校表示，8月2号晚开始，中国人民解放军东部战区将在台岛周边开展一系列联合军事行动，在台岛北部、西南、东南海空域进行联合海空演训，在台湾海峡进行远程火力实弹射击，在台岛东部海域组织长岛火力试射。此次行动是针对美近期在台湾问题上消极举动重大升级采取的严正震慑，是对台独势力谋独行径的严重警告。
车来了。
您正在收看的是24小时。
24小时，我们再来关注国内焦点。中国物流与采购联合会今天公布7月份中国物流业景气指数环比有所回落，但是呢，整体来看，物流基本平稳运行的态势没有改变，投资和预期指数仍然在扩张区间。
7月份中国物流业景气指数为48.6%，环比回调3.5个百分点。分项指数显示，业务量指数和新订单指数有所回落，反映出
普伦克怎么样？
你用4G 包传回去不点。
哦。
抽卡，然后传回去。
好。
我就知道他因为找车道。哦。
This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service.
This is the primary audio for the good of the country. Democracies work well in that instance, but not in this. So at this juncture
of the three China-U.S. joint communiques, and is the premise and basis of the establishment and development of diplomatic ties between the two countries. The Chinese mainland has been the largest export and investment destination for companies from the Taiwan island. According to China's General Administration of Customs,
being killed by an American drone strike in the Afghan capital, Kabul. Ayman al-Zawahiri was one of the masterminds of the 9/11 attacks on America alongside Osama bin Laden and was one on America's most wanted terrorist list. Well, President Biden said his death would help give closure to the families of the thousands of people killed in 2001. Well, the United States has killed the leader of al-Qaeda in that drone strike in the capital of Kabul. He and Osama bin Laden plotted those attacks. Let's hear a little more from our correspondent here that is here with me. We will hear from our correspondent in a moment, but let's first hear from Joe Biden.
On Saturday, at my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan, that killed the emir of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. You know, Zawahiri was bin Laden's leader. He was with him the whole time. He was his number 2 man, his deputy at the time the terrorist attack of 9/11. He was deeply involved in the planning of 9/11. One of the most responsible for the attacks that murdered 2,977 people on American soil.
Well, that was Joe Biden. Joining me in the studio is Inayat Yassini, journalist at BBC Afghan Service here. And Inayat, has there been anything so far from al-Qaeda or from the Taliban?
Not yet. We have been trying to speak with the Taliban leaders. I myself tried, but unfortunately they are not responding. But some sources say they are now in meetings. They may come, and they have to come with an answer because it is creating a lot of problem for the Taliban on political front. So we may expect if they delay, there will be more suspicion. They have to give a response. Only they say they condemn the attack. They will not mention who was there and who was killed there, and how they will respond. I have been trying to speak with them, but unfortunately we haven't managed.
Tell us a little more then about where the strike happened.
This is the primary audio. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters Live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters Live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters Live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters Live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters Live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters Live service.
Are they going to be long?
Right now, we're facing a recession. The question is how long that recession will be, whether it turns into a depression. You have the United States thinking that you can change people's eating habits or the fact that they need oil by adjusting fiscal and monetary policy. It's just not going to work. So at this juncture, facing COVID, all the things that you mentioned earlier, climate change, the pandemic, everything along those lines, instead of coming together, what you have is people becoming further apart. This will cause stocks to plummet because there's going to be no new investment. Why would I invest in a world that's so uncertain? And you're going to start people looking for assets that are safe. And that means that you're going to have money going away from the areas that you need it to operate your economy. You're going to see jobs being lost until you get to a point where assets have been fairly priced in terms of yield, what you can make from investing your dollars or your money. Until that happens, there's not going to be a recovery. The Fed is obviously worried about this. They're trying to stockpile enough, in their vaults so that they can, decrease rates in the future and try to reinflate the economy. But when that date is going to come, nobody knows, because incidents like this are only making it far worse.
Einar, can we talk about reactions from Taiwan, or a lack of whatsoever, because the island's authorities have mostly kept silent on Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan? It's strategic, of course, because it's a gesture that they're making. We did not invite Pelosi exactly. She mostly invited herself, and it's strategic on the part of them to keep silent. We haven't really heard from your leader Tsai Ing-wen or other authorities on this matter. What are they thinking here?
They have done a lot of interviews. Right now, many of the Taiwanese people and newspapers are not really covering this very much. They don't really understand why Pelosi is coming. There's no agenda. She's not there for a meeting to talk about aid to Taiwan. She's not there to talk about anything in particular. She's making a grandstanding whistle stop to say hello, say I'm one with Taiwan, whatever that means, and then move on. Will Taiwan actually benefit? No. Quite frankly, it's put them into even more serious doubt. Who wants to invest in Taiwan right now? Even Taiwanese business people will be thinking very closely about what the situation is in the future because of the uncertainty. So this is the kind of thing where you are going to exacerbate the downturn that we're already facing. And this is going to have repercussions far beyond Taiwan and the U.S. It's going to go to these small developing countries who are also going to suffer. Remember, you had the same exact thing with Ukraine. The U.S. Created the situation in which Russia decided that they had enough, they attacked. At that point, what happened? Food sources,
首先呢是气温方面，今天的高温天气的范围继续向北方蔓延，部分地区的体感闷热。中央气象台今天继续发布高温黄色预警。
中
央气象台的监测显示，进入8月，副热带高压再度加强，并携带着高温闷热天气一路向西北方向扩展。昨天，高温主要集中在四川盆地、长江中下游及其以南地区。 华北、黄淮只是零零散散出现一些高温，是昨天不能湖北、
Has it accomplished it? Well, the Europeans have all said, all the NATO members said they're going to now put the 2% that they've always promised into it. They also are indicating that they stand with America, at least as Ukraine is concerned. Now, are there misgivings? Yes. But now the EU is dependent upon America for energy, for food, and this is pushing them closer together. So many people in Washington say, well, it's one of those things, we have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And if we want to get the right-thinking people, like the Europeans, on our side, yes, we might have to sacrifice Ukraine. But that's okay, because the U.S. has done this before. Afghanistan, Iraq, you can go down the list of countries. Syria,
最高气温多在34度左右，但由于相对湿度较大，因此体感十分闷热。提醒大家注意做好防暑降温工作。
受到大气环流的影响，近期我国华南地区的降雨非常频繁。预计今天一直到6号，华南、江南将会自东向西迎来中到大雨，局地暴雨。降雨的到来呢，也会缓解华南地区持续已久的高温天气。
另外呢，东北华。